Good morning, everyone. I'm Dilip Bachwani, CTO at Qualys. And joining me today is Jim Reavis, CEO of the Cloud Security Alliance. For those of you who don't know, Cloud Security Alliance is one of the most influential, not-for-profit cybersecurity communities out there with a mission to enable organizations to better adopt cybersecurity practices. In addition to focusing on cloud security, which is in their name, they also focus on a number of other evolving cybersecurity areas, such as IoT, zero trust, quantum resilience, and now lately, of course, on generative AI and agentic AI. Today, we will be talking mostly about AI agents. And I will share a little bit about how we are using generative AI and agentic AI internally within our organization, how we are integrating that into our risk management platform. And then, of course, Jim will share his insights from his vantage point leading the Cloud Security Alliance. So, Jim, thank you for joining us.
Oh, it's a pleasure to be here. It was good to hear all that laughter backstage. So you can take this conference out of Vegas, but apparently you can't take Vegas out of the attendees. So that's good to hear.
So, Jim, to begin with, AI agents. We are all coming to the realization that AI is here to stay. AI is here to transform how we do work, how we do business. We are certainly seeing this within our own organization. As I'm talking to customers, every one of them is exploring on how they can better utilize it within their own worlds. And then, of course, as they are using vendors, which vendors are more forward-thinking and providing value. Now, as you are interacting with organizations in your role, can you share a little bit on how organizations are thinking about this and how they are operating in this new world?
Absolutely. It's the pace of change here is just stunning, and I'm finding people who are they're starting a project with AI and particularly agentic, and the technology changes multiple times in the project, and it's like building a house, and the electrical specs change 3 times, the nails changed 5 times. And so when we think about this, so the agents, obviously in the name, they operate with agency, they operate with autonomy, and I think the idea of the personal agent that's doing everything for someone, it's like that's one segment, and I think that's somewhat of a holy grail that we're getting there, and day by day you're seeing a lot. But organizations and enterprises are what we spend a lot of time with, and they're using this in a lot of different ways to think about that automation at scale, because interacting with ChatGPT or Claude and asking it questions, that's going to make you marginally more efficient. But if you talk about like really changing customer service in an organization that's got millions of customers, that's the real game changer, all those sorts of things at scale. So in order to do that and to operate in autonomy with a predictive technology, we're finding that there's like a whole host of issues that happen. So the successful ones I'm seeing today, they're actually thinking big, but they're starting very small in creating agents and multiple agents that have sort of simple autonomous tasks that they can coordinate together in sort of a loosely coupled architecture to be able to operate. But we're in early days. There's a huge amount of human oversight in the ones that I see.
Yeah. You talked about taking autonomous actions and doing things independently. And I feel that when generative AI came out almost 3 years back, and then over the last year as the industry has kind of started focusing more towards agentic AI, where instead of just a response being generated, right, now you have a system that can reason, that can plan, and then it can act autonomously. That's very different. And I feel that to get more grounded responses, MCP servers and others have helped. So to your point, yes, start small, but the most important thing, especially even for us on the cybersecurity side, was how do you get the most grounded responses? Because if you are just asking a question to a large language model, you will get an answer. But sometimes you don't want any answer. You want to be able to ask the same question twice and get the same answer, at least in cybersecurity. And what we feel internally right now is, yes, generative AI will give you nice summarization of, let's say, incident response or even your security posture. But if you're asking a question on what are my most critical vulnerabilities that I should focus on, as a CISO, if you ask the same question twice, you want to get the same set of vulnerabilities, as long as the underlying data has not changed. And I feel that this evolution that has happened, especially in the last 8-9 months, is just helping us as an industry to move forward.
Yep. Yeah, you're seeing this. We're figuring out some strategies like running it through multiple LLMs or having another agent that's sort of checking the work. And there's been actually some scientific research that if you break down an AI task into multiple agents, you can get more deterministic outcomes than just the strictly predictive ones. Some of the early work on how they were able to get, like even old 3.5 OpenAI ChatGPT to like perform at a higher level on test taking was by breaking down the problems and finding like other ways to do that. And this is like in our industry, because we think about AI in all ways and how we secure it and how you solve big business problems, but it's really going to transform our industry. And I saw the presentations yesterday that people need to understand, and we're starting to see some of that like real impact in security operations centers and compliance activities that they're able to actually use this in those areas.
Yeah, we've also been talking about cyber risk assistants, cyber risk agents that we are building into our platform. We are not the only ones that is building these digital employees into products and platforms. And then in that context, you also have to think about human-AI interaction and how do employees and digital employees work together and coexist. How are you thinking about that? What are you seeing in the industry?
Yeah, we're really sort of learning that maybe we're finding maybe natural language is not always the best way to interface with some of these systems, and that some of the really advanced good prompts look like code. They're very like sophisticated in what you need to go do. So we're seeing sort of emergence of AI development architectures, and with the codex types of platforms, they're creating like some new things that have sort of yet to be standardized. And so like MCP is one thing we think about. It's sort of the standard, but there's no security like really built around it. So we've got to build all of that. The threat modeling that you do with agentic, hasn't been done. So we're looking at what are all these practices that we need to start building to surround like some of the core like agentic capabilities that are out there. But I think that we're going to find, and this kind of harking back to what I said yesterday, that cybersecurity experts need to know the most about AI, that it is, optimal security is a huge data problem, and this is where this operates. This is the sweet spot of AI, so there's no reason why we can't be the leaders here in what we do.
Yes, completely agree. One of the things that we also see, just adding on to this digital employees and human employees, is as we are rolling this out internally, we are using a lot of AI tools internally within the organization for efficiency and productivity. What we find is oftentimes it's our best engineers that get the most value out of coding copilots. So it's not always about delegating and saying, let somebody else do the work. But you really need to understand how these systems work, how they operate, how their internals work. How do you engage with it to get the most value out of it? So, in fact, I'm coming to the realization that instead of knowing less, you're almost at a point where you need a deeper understanding to be really good at how you get the most value out of these tools.
I would say 100%, and even knowing like the intricacies of the different models that are out there, there's like so many that are, Hugging Face is sort of the GitHub repo for models if you haven't like gone out there, and there's so much variety in what they will do, so many different ways. They have their own almost sort of personalities, but you're right that the people who really understand this really well, it's a huge force multiplier, and it becomes this collaboration partner. And like really good engineers, it's not doing all the development for them, but it is setting up the environments and doing all sorts of work that maybe the junior engineers were doing, and they can really focus on what's the specific creative tasks that they have to do. And then you can get inspiration with some of those things. And we got to be careful. They just started seeing some CVEs about remote execution in Cursor and things like that. So there's definitely a lot for us to like understand there. And then identity, I think, to what you were saying about the digital employees that you have that are agents is we have laws, we have regulations, and like know your customer and things like that. And an agent really, it can't apply for its own credit card. And so that's something that you got to go figure out. And maybe they're using stablecoin or they're using someone else's. And so there's all sorts of new sort of policies and risks. So we think identity is like a huge like area that we've got to really have some new innovations in agentic identity.
Yes. Since you bring up identity, maybe we can pivot over a little bit on the security side of agentic AI. There is a lot of innovation and productivity gains that we are seeing. But as that is happening, we also have to be mindful of security and compliance. Do you see more traditional cybersecurity frameworks like Zero Trust and how we've been doing security for systems and users? Do you see that evolving as generative AI, and now especially agentic AI with more autonomous behavior is becoming more prevalent? How do you see that changing? How should organizations think about their security teams evolving in this world?
Yeah. So I really think that you should all like think about how AI returns us to the first principles of cybersecurity, and that as opposed to sort of seeing the world and like what's the latest buzzword around a product category or everything like that. So like understanding vulnerabilities, understanding risk. And so Zero Trust, I think, is actually a really good philosophy. A lot of times that gets pigeonholed. It's like about network security, but it's really about sort of a philosophy of anything can be breached. And so what do you do about that? And how do you do least privilege? And so I think it's a great sort of data governance strategy as you're looking to take corporate data and you're looking to ingest that in there. And then I think things like the NIST cybersecurity framework and us being sort of proactive and needing to react and learn from that in that cycle, that's very much the case, because we want to set up the guardrails correctly on agents. They're going to do some crazy things like give away free plane tickets or like want to please the instructions malicious instructions they get and do something that's incorrect. So we're going to need to react quickly, learn from that categorize those things, and then put that in our loop to do better. So it's gonna. I think it's really the frameworks work well. Your learning, again, first principles of cybersecurity are very applicable, and you can actually find that these tools ultimately are going to sort of extend the capabilities that you have.
Yeah. I think you guys, even at the CSA, put out some information on AI identity and access management, where in addition to thinking about user and service identities, now you have to think about AI agents as identities in and of themselves.
Yep.
How do you see, that coming together? Because now there is another very unique identity which will take actions in a predictive manner, right? And you need guardrails around that. You need the right checks and balances for that. So what are you proposing in that context?
Well, we identify a lot of the problems when we tell you guys to go solve them, but sometimes we have really good solutions as well. But definitely there's been a lot of the buzz around non-human identities and how we need to have all these service identities. And you got to really think about anything, a data store, an application, its version, all needing identities. And so we see that as the same thing with agents and versioning of those. The challenge I think we see is might not say this at a different conference, but definitely a lot of the identity management that's been implemented is fairly brittle inside of organizations. It's in need of updates, and the things that you need to be doing here are very sort of rapid enrollment and decommissioning of identities are some key things that have been identified. Solvable problems, some people have solved them, some have done that, but that's like very, very critical. And on the content side, on the data side, we're getting to a point very soon when there's going to be more synthetic data than actual data, and we're going to literally have to assume everything is fake if we don't have the right watermarks, we don't have the right sort of provenance with blockchain or things like that. So, and we've identified sort of directionally where we need to go and steps we need to take on this, and we need sort of an identity maturity approach to this, but there's definitely a lot of lifting that as an industry we all need to do together.
Yeah. And even for us, one of the things we talked about the cyber risk agents that we are rolling out across the risk management platform. But one of the things that we really had to think hard about was how do we make sure that when you are interacting with an agent, that you are interacting only within your own subscription. So when you ask a question, yes, we will interpret that question because it is in natural language. But then we will identify which MCP server to go to, what tool or API to call, and we constrain those requests with the authorization and authentication of the user who is making that request. And these things become important because oftentimes when new technology comes out, the security and compliance tends to lag behind. And that may be okay for some industry verticals, but especially for us as cybersecurity professionals, it's important that we think about it hard on what we are rolling out. And not just within a cybersecurity product, this is also as you are thinking about pushing things out in your own organizations for whatever value add that you are thinking about. It's really important and critical to think about identity. And then, of course, there are other aspects like attack surface. The attack surface for AI and agentic AI is very different from the point of the request that you are making. That could be corrupted. Your context could be hijacked. You have to think about what your MCP server, what APIs and tools your MCP server can call, what the guardrails are there, what kind of response is coming out. Are you checking that response for data leakage? And all of this is now, to some degree, part of security. So just the way when you release a web application within your organization and your AppSec team and your pen testing team is validating that everything is looking okay, now with agentic AI applications, the scope is broadened considerably that we all have to think about.
Yeah, continuous monitoring is like, that was always like a nice thing we wanted to do, and now it's like a must we want to do because, again, we can make these more deterministic, but it certainly is really important for us to be monitoring, like based on there can be any changes or again, just a different response to an identical like request that comes in because of the nature of this predictive technology. So it's just really important that we've got that real-time like infrastructure in how we're monitoring this.
Absolutely. Even on the observability side, on the continuous monitoring side, another bit of information that we were thinking about internally was you're making a call to a large language model, you're calling multiple MCP servers, you're getting a lot of data. Now you want to know from an auditing and forensic standpoint what kind of calls were made. So you could go back and you can think about what the behavior of your models is and how they're acting. But you also have to be careful that you're not taking a customer's data and putting that in a log file without the right kinds of controls. Ideally, you're not just putting customers' data in the log file at all, which is very different from logging of typical systems where you're logging more at an infra level, or if there is a failure, you're just logging for failure. With agentic AI, now you're logging for behavior, and you have to be very mindful. We all have to be very mindful of what kind of behavior are we logging and documenting, how long are we keeping that, and how are we doing analysis, who has access to that. So another big area to think about.
Yeah, so data is like how we're going to inform how we do this better, and it may not make everyone happy, but I kind of go back to history when you always would wait for the third version of a Microsoft product and say, hey, that's going to work now. And why was that is because basically all of us in the world, we were the testers for that. And they use that to improve the products. And the reality is we need a very large sort of corpus of data to really understand how we can like create a lot of these different activities. And there's so much good things that are actually happening. And so, you know, it's our job to sort of program ourselves with that mentality of what can go wrong in this industry. That's what we do. And that's why we run up big bar bills and things like that. But we also have to recognize that this is actually going to solve a huge amount of problems. And I've actually seen, like, we talk about like the contextual benefits of doing this and like marrying together a report on like threats and risks that you get out of log files with Zoom calls that say, oh, these are the plans we have. These are the IT rollouts we're going to do, and they're only in the Zoom notes. They're not anywhere else, you know, captured. And then by correlating those, oh, this really narrows down the work I need to do based on where our crown jewels are going to move within the organization. So there's a lot of good that's coming out of this, but we are going to need this big corpus of data that goes to how we fix things in enterprise. It's going to need to go back to OpenAI and Anthropic so that they continue to refine their models, because they're not going to be able to do it with their safety labs in and of themselves. They're going to need like the community helping them.
So, Jim, for the longest time, we are trying to automate everything. We want to automate the SOC, we want to automate incident response. But now with what you're sharing and with all the data and how these systems behave, do you think there is some aspect of human governance and oversight that is required to make sure that these systems are behaving as they should be?
Yeah, absolutely. From like the monitoring or the auditing, like the human in the loop is like me so critical. Look, this is not about automating without humans. If you're able to like take coding, you're able to make people 10x more productive. In your industry, you're going to try and create 10x more code because you're going to go after more business opportunities or make your code better than your competitor. You're not going to. It's not going to work by automating this without people. And if you talk about auditing doing vulnerability assessments, you're going to need to do this more frequently. You're going to need the data more frequently to account for all of these changes that happen that you're not aware of. So humans are going to be like not passive observers of this. They are going to make the strategic decisions on how you adjust and fine tune every part of your information security program, as well, more broadly your IT program, based on like the real-time feeds you get and things that repeat themselves consistently 100 times. Maybe you have less observations of that and you let the AI do that. But this is very much, I'm not worried about the matrix. That's going to be like way off in the future. I am worried about malicious use of this for sure. But I think this is definitely in our industry, this is a great opportunity for us to like do better and keep up.
Let's talk a bit about compliance. Mm-hmm. So we recently had the EU AI Act go into effect. NIST has the risk management framework for AI. CSA has a controls matrix where you guys have almost 250 specific controls that users and organizations should think about. But all of this is, rapidly coming out. And how should organizations think about the regulatory landscape around AI? Keeping in mind that you don't want to stifle innovation, but you want to make sure that, and be mindful that these compliance frameworks actually help you do things the right way.
Yeah. So not only are there a lot of new regulations that we expect, although there's maybe somewhat of a pause in that in the US, but all the existing regulations like GDPR, all of those have an AI aspect to them. So they are relevant as well. And so, we've created our controls matrix as an operational controls that for the whole life cycle of the implementation, because we feel like the EU AI Act, NIST, those are really good sort of high level. These are the principles, and these are maybe some of the consequences. And we think we give you sort of this operational thing, but the sort of the good side that we're seeing and where like people are able to perform compliance activities so much more efficiently is the ability for generative AI to correlate one regulation with another and say, oh, if you have this, if you've done this, if you've done CSAs or ISO or something, and you got it down to a control level of abstraction, then you can usually get 80% of the way there by feeding it into an LLM to say, hey, how does this relate? Provide me a compliance report with this regulation or this auditor meeting I'm going to have, and it gets you pretty far. And it's like no secret, like that's what we're using now because we do a lot of crosswalks between regulations, and we've got that actually published out there with how does this relate to the EU AI Act, or that might be published in a couple of weeks, but NIST and ISO 27001, ISO 42001, the AI management system. So, but that is the power of this, is going to like help you to do it. So a lot more compliance challenges. Again, a lot more of the continuous monitoring, continuous compliance. But the tools are going to help you sort of like get the workload down to a manageable level if you've got a good, solid sort of controls framework on how you're operating.
So you're saying there will be a lot more compliance activity, but we can use AI to do the compliance for us.
It's like, just like malicious AI, good AI does that. Maybe depending on where you are, maybe you think compliance is malicious AI too. But it's going to like help you a lot with that as well, for sure.
Yeah, it's. I almost tend to think of agentic AI as an employee, but an employee with a lot of freedom. And so to your point, you need oversight. You need the right kind of governance. You need continuous monitoring. And then, of course, you have to comply with the laws and even the ethical aspect of it. But these tools can certainly help. A lot of what we are talking about, especially on the compliance side, and quite a bit on the security side too. Yes, AI brings a lot of challenges, or on the, not so much challenges, but it makes us rethink how we look at security, but we can use AI itself to accelerate what we need to put in place.
Yeah, if we look at the lens through what is possible with something that can sort of emulate 10,000 junior engineers all simultaneously, you kind of can go, oh, what can I do now that I couldn't do before? What are the possibilities? And like, I encourage people to think that. We're navigators, explorers into a new world, and it's important that we sort of set aside some of that experimentation time to get some of these breakthroughs on like what seem to be intractable problems, but really aren't.
Yeah. Jim, you've talked about junior engineers a couple of times. So it seems like you are not sold on AI being senior engineers just yet.
Not quite yet. I like the term artificial jagged intelligence, where they can operate at PhD level on one hand, but then they can't count the number of R's and strawberries in the other. So you know, they were eager children when this thing started. They're very, very gifted teenagers, but like we're not ready to turn the keys over to them yet.
Okay. Looking ahead a few years, how do you see a world with obviously a lot of AI innovation, a lot of change happening, but also secure and responsible AI?
I think that's sort of like it's our decisions that we're going to make on how we want to use this. I just believe with every sort of generational shift, there's a lot of new leaders that emerge. And again, if we go to first principles and we build our solutions on top of AI, we're going to see we're going to see so much innovation. Some of the largest companies in the world, like 5 years from now, may not even exist today. That's how fast things can go. So it's hard to predict. But what I do think we're going to get a mentality of understanding how to deal with this change frequency better as humans, and it won't seem as weird and as unusual that, oh, there's a new model now. You know, you take like a big code base like Salesforce, they may refactor their code every day, you know, in 5 years, and that's really going to help keep that secure, because there's not going to be any vulnerabilities. There's no zero-day vulnerabilities will be possible. So there's a lot of exciting things that I think we may see, and I think it'll be a lot more comfortable. It'll sort of be kind of in the background more than maybe it is in the foreground right now, but it'll definitely be here, and it'll be much bigger.
For sure. What do you think the Cloud Security Alliance's role will be in this new future, and how you guys could contribute there?
Well, I feel like I'm going to have to print new business cards and like change our name probably. But we want to look around the corner, and we want to look at a lot of the emerging issues. We want to understand, like, do we need actually a new CVE ecosystem? I'd love to have this community weigh in on that, and what does that look like? We think that this whole agentic payments, we need to go spin up a working group to understand sort of that whole life cycle. We want to like really look at how we can create new ways of thinking about risk management, risk assessment based on the different inputs, and on autonomous technologies. How do you do like new sorts of risk assessment there? But basically, we want to do sort of the same thing of building sort of this ecosystem that's consensus best practices, that's made available free to the world to go use, provide that education, and provide sort of benchmarks and standards on what can be done out here. So I think that there's always going to be the need for Qualys and a CSA, or whatever we call ourselves, ASA or whatever, that it's going to be really important. And so, but it's up to us to like keep things, stay ahead of the curve, look around the corner, understand those emerging trends.
Those are good points. We are coming to our close here. If there is one piece of advice that you would give organizations as they are embarking on their AI, generative AI, agentic AI journeys, as they are thinking about how do we do this, what would you say?
Sort of like repeating myself, but be the experts, which means continuous education of yourself. Find the safe areas to experiment. Build like simple agents with like a sort of broad vision there. We'll monitor things sort of carefully, but like don't, please don't be behind. Please be ready for when the business comes to you with very grandiose plans, and you're saying we're at like step one on this. We need to be further ahead there.
Yeah, agree. I'd say embrace the innovation, and I think we can all also at the same time say that innovation and responsibility can go hand in hand, even for something that's as new as the world in which we are living. So thank you very much, Jim, for joining us.
Absolutely, thank you.